Well, this morning we're going to start just a short 2-week series where we're going to talk about coming to the table. For us as the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, the table is at the very center of our worship service each and every week. It is a powerful reminder to us of what it means to come together as a people of God in God's sanctuary and to experience the grace of Jesus Christ. This is a large part of who we are. And we're going to talk a little bit about what it means for us to come to this table. But more importantly, we're going to talk about what it looks like to take the table of grace and hospitality out beyond these doors. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to talk about table fellowship in the Bible. There are a lot of stories in Scripture where people gather around the table, where they share meals with one another. Some of the most important events and some of the most important lessons in the Bible happen around meals, around the table. And that's what we're going to be talking about this week and next. And I want to begin our conversation this morning by showing you just a short video which describes a situation around a table and how sometimes in the very same situation we treat other people very differently. Let's watch and see what happens.
Let's just say this is you. You're the big red person. All these people around you are just the people that you come in contact with. Some are people that you're friends with. Some are just, the checkout person at the grocery store. Everyone has a moral circle. And all that means is that the people that are most central to you there are going to get your most love, and they're the people that you're going to be nicest towards. Okay, how many of you here have waited tables? So you guys know what misery that is. I have waited tables also. Imagine a friend, a family member, somebody you really care about is going to start waiting tables. They go through the whole training process. You get a group of people together. You go, you sit in their section. You're all excited, first night. And they come over and they are just sweating bullets, right? What do you say to them? Oh, don't worry about us. Don't worry about us. Don't even worry about it. We don't even need drinks. I don't even like water. It's fine. We're fine. I don't even like this. An hour later, they come over and take your order. You ordered steak. In front of you is cod. It's great. You love cod. Cod's terrific. We're going to eat this. This is going to be great. And then what do you do at the end of the night? You over-tip them, don't you? You over-tip them. Now, imagine that same scenario, and you have no idea who this server is. And they come, and you know what? You ordered Coke Zero, and this tastes like Diet Coke. So you stop making eye contact with these people. You start to do that mental math of the tip going down, down, down. I'm not going to even look at this person. This is ridiculous. We were paying for a good time. What is this? 2 different types of behavior from us for 2 different people. One is your mom, one is your friend, one is your brother. The other one isn't. But the other one's somebody's mom, the other one's somebody's friend, the other one's somebody's brother. Why do we justify 2 different types of behavior for people that we come in contact with? We show kindness to our kind, meaning the people that are inside that circle are generally going to be people that you think are your kind. Ethnicity, background, financial status, age, orientation, family member, skill set, you name it. These are the people that I am going to give my most love to. Just imagine with me, how different would your world be if you just expanded your moral circle? What if all of a sudden the people in your church were known for treating other people in their society like family? What would that do to you? What would that do to your church? What would that do to your life and your heart?
This last week, I spent some time doing something that I would encourage you to do. I sat down and I actually drew a circle, and I started to think about who was in that circle. And the first people that I added to that circle were my closest friends and then my family. They were pretty automatic, and those are my kind. Those are my people, and the first people that I think about. I added very soon after them this congregation and this community of faith that I've come to know and love over the past almost 16 years now. People that I trust and people that I can share my life with. You're in my circle. I began to think about other people who were in my circle. And what I began to notice about the majority, this doesn't describe everyone in my circle, but about the majority of people in my circle, is that my kind, they look a lot like me. They were educated like me. They've had life experiences similar to mine. They have economic experiences similar to mine. They worship like me. They tend to vote and look at issues in society and our world like me. The people who are in my circle most readily and easily are people who root for the appropriate sports teams, right? Those are the people that are in my circle, and they're the ones that I tend to be most naturally kind toward and most naturally accepting of and patient and tolerant. Patient with and tolerant of, right? Then I started to look at the people who are outside of my circle. And the people who are outside of my circle tended, by and large, to look a little bit different from me. They weren't in the same economic strata, either being above or below me. They didn't experience the same kind of education that I had or the same life experiences that I've had. They don't have the same kind of family setup or situation that I have. They don't worship like me. They don't vote like me. They don't tend to see the world and its problems and its solutions in the same way that I see the world and the problems and their solutions. And a lot of them support absolutely the wrong sport team. Right? They're outside of my circle. And this is what I've noticed about myself, is that the people who are outside of my circle are more easily treated with a lack of kindness, a lack of patience, and a lack of tolerance. It's easier for me to dismiss them, to turn away from them, and to not be welcoming toward them because they're outside of my circle. Now, you and I both know that what I'm describing is not Christ-like behavior. When I treat someone with righteous indignation and cruelty because they're different from me, that is not Christ-like behavior. When I reject them as my equal because they think differently or love differently or live differently or anything like that, that is not Christ-like behavior. We all know this, and yet there are moments when we find ourselves encountering someone who is not of our kind, and however we describe that, who is not a part of our circle, and we don't treat them the way we should. I want to talk about how Jesus treated people who were other than his kind. People who were outside what we might consider to be his moral circle. Those who were different from him. And there are all kinds of examples throughout Scripture where we see Jesus doing this. What I want to focus on are a couple stories that take place around tables, where people have come together to eat and to drink and to be in relationship. And in those moments, we find out something about Jesus, we learn something from Jesus, and we see Jesus do something that we're supposed to model as his followers. And what I want to talk about are a couple stories in Scripture that I find to be the hardest stories for me, because I don't fully understand how Jesus has the patience and the kindness and the love to do this. I love Jesus. I really do. I think Jesus is great. Sometimes the dude is a real pain in the neck. Sometimes what Jesus teaches and sometimes what Jesus calls us to do is hard, it's inconvenient, and there's a lot of times where I don't like it. I'm not always thrilled about following in the footsteps of Christ. Sometimes I have to do it kicking and screaming. And in today's stories, we're going to see Jesus living into a practice that I suspect is not only difficult for me. Now, the story that I'm going to share with you, there's two of them, and it tells us an example and a time and a moment where Jesus went to have dinner with some Pharisees. Now, I want you to remember that Pharisees and Sadducees and scribes and religious lawyers, they are the ones that are going to turn Jesus over for execution, right? He knows where this story is going. He knows these people are trying to frame him, set him up, and betray him. He knows this. And yet, they decide to invite him over to dinner. Now, this shouldn't shock us all that much that Jesus goes, because Jesus basically eats his way through the Gospels. Jesus is always eating and drinking. Always. Dude eats a lot, dude drinks a lot. And in fact, he ate and drank so much that he started to develop a reputation. Some of his opponents described him in this way: the Son of Man has come eating and drinking, and you say, look, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners, right? He had a reputation for eating a lot, drinking a lot, and for doing both of those things with sinners and tax collectors and people that you weren't supposed to hang out with, right? And what I love about Jesus, not so much that he had dinner with Pharisees, we'll get to that in a second, but what I love about Jesus is that Jesus was willing to eat and drink with anyone. He didn't care. If you were willing to have him over to your house, he was willing to come. If you were willing to go eat with him, he was willing to go eat with you. It just didn't matter. And not only was he willing to eat with anyone, he could give two cares what you thought about the people he ate with. He just did not care. He didn't care if it bothered you. He didn't care if you think he shouldn't be with that kind of person. He didn't care. He is going to eat with anyone he wants to eat with. He's going to drink with anyone he wants to drink with, and that's what he's going to do. So now he's been invited to go over and have dinner and eat and drink with the people who are trying to kill him. And he decides, sounds like a good idea. So he goes. Now, in these two stories, and Scripture gives us the indication that this happens more than once, but in the two stories that we have in Luke, we're dropped right into the middle of the moment. Right into the middle of the dinner party. And in the middle of each of those dinner parties, Jesus does something that really upsets the hosts. What he does is he shows kindness to someone who's outside their circle. Someone who is not of their kind. In the first story, in Luke 7, there is a woman that comes in and she begins to show kindness to Jesus. And as she shows kindness to Jesus, the Pharisee, whose home it is, who is the host, he says, if he knew the kind of woman that she was, he would never let her touch him. He would never let her speak to him. He would never let her treat him the way that she's treating him. There's no way. She's not our kind. In the second story, in Luke 14, it's a Sabbath day, and as they're eating, there is a man who comes upon them at the meal who has a disability. Now, if you had a disability in that day and age, it was often seen as something you were responsible for having, that this was God's disfavor upon you, and it made you unclean. It made you unwelcome. It made you not of our kind. And on the Sabbath day, where it was against the law, punishable by death, to do any work, Jesus heals him. Didn't go over well with the Pharisees sitting around the table, and they let him know it. In both of these stories, Jesus takes the moment to teach this kind of people how to treat someone who's outside their circle. And he has some pretty hard words for them. And he challenges them to change their behaviors, to be more welcoming, to be more humble, to be more loving, to be more giving, and to be more kind, and to welcome more people like this around their table. Now, there are moments in the gospel where Jesus would call people out publicly. But more often than not, when Jesus had a difficult word to share with someone, he sat around a table with them. And the first thing they did was they ate. And they had something to drink. And they talked. You see, what the Scripture stories don't tell us is what happened on either side of those moments. But we know what happened on either side of those moments. Because we know what happened at dinners. We know what happened at dinners today. What happens at dinners today? People don't just walk in and sit right down at the table and start talking about difficult topics. No. They went into each other's homes. And they got to know each other. They had casual talk. When Jesus, when he's gathered around the table with those Pharisees, he knows their names. He knows them. He knows their families. He knows their stories. He's been in their homes. He knows the layout of their living rooms and their dining rooms and their dens and where they hang out. He knows what neighborhoods that they come from. He knows them, and he gets to know them and spend time with them. And only after doing so does Jesus then talk about the hard stuff. Here's what we learn in these stories. So important for us to remember. Jesus didn't show up just to call people out. He showed up to invite them in. Jesus didn't show up just to call people out. He showed up to invite them in. He didn't show up just to correct people and tell people what they were doing wrong and to talk about the difficult things. He showed up to invite them into a new way of life, to invite them into a way that would transform themselves and the communities around them. He invited them in. In a world where we often show up to call people out, and we can do so more and more easily now than ever before. In a world where we have conversations through computer screens, and we show up and take different sides of issues on different sides of street corners. When we gather with our kind and talk about those kind. We have something to learn from Jesus in this moment. Because Jesus is teaching us with every ounce of his being, it is not enough just to show up and call people out. We have to show up, and we have to invite people in. We have to get to know their names and their stories. We need to know the layout of their home and their lives. We need to know what neighborhood they come from. We need to get to understand them. Only then can we start to talk about the hard things. And here's the thing, we need to talk about the hard things. We need to talk about these things. This notion that when we go over to people's homes or we gather with other people, we shouldn't talk about religion and politics, that is broken thinking. We need to be talking about the things that are important to us. We just need to learn a better way of talking about them. These are the things that matter most to us, and they matter most to our society. And we need to be able to sit down with each other, and we just need to be able to hear how we got to where we are. We need to listen to each other's stories before we force others to believe the way that we believe or think. Sometimes we just got to sit down. We got to have dinner with someone. Sometimes it helps to have a drink. We just got to sit there and talk and listen and form relationship. Now, when we get together and we do this, and we have this kind of difficult conversation, there is a barrier. There's a line that we can't cross. And the line is this, and we talk about it a lot in this community of faith. No dehumanization. We don't get to do that. If we're going to model Jesus' behavior, if we're going to live like Jesus, if we're going to sit and have dinner with or have drinks with someone who is not our kind, and we're going to talk with them about the things that we disagree on most, and we're going to be vulnerable and real with each other, we can't step across the line and dehumanize one another. We don't get to name call. No group speak. No stereotypical responses. All of those things are dehumanizing. If we ever seek to have a conversation with someone, we're trying to minimize their very personhood by making them less than us. This is decidedly unchristian, and it is not okay. And when we have kind of risky conversation about important stuff, when someone starts to do that, we need to put up our hand and we say, whoa, time out. The rules of engagement have to change. We don't get to talk like that because it's certainly not going to get us anywhere but into deeper division. Now, I went back and after some time this week, I looked at my circle again. And I started to try to figure out, what's going on? Who's on the inside and who's on the outside? And how is it that I'm treating people? And how is it that I'm being in relationship with people? And I began to notice something. The more specific I got, when I started writing down names, right? Who's in my circle? What I noticed is that there are people in my circle, people who are my kind, my people. They don't look like me. They don't live like me. They have experienced different educational backgrounds from me. Some of them are a lot richer than me. Some of them are a lot poorer than me. Some of them have had very different upbringings. Some of them vote very differently from me and believe that the solutions to the world's problems are very different than the solutions that I believe are going to bring the world to a better place. There are people in my circle who I care deeply about and love, who I treat with patience, love, and kindness in a way that I don't treat those same kind of people who are outside of my circle. And you know what the difference is? Relationship. It's because I know them. I know their name. I know their story. I've been in their living rooms. I've sat around their dining room tables. I've had a meal with them. I've had a drink with them. We've talked. And it allows us to be in a place that's different. They're very, very different from me, but they're in my circle. And the other thing that I've learned about the people who are in my circle, especially the ones who are different from me, is the more diverse my circle is, the more tolerant I become of diverse people outside of my circle. 2 years ago, I didn't have a single Muslim friend that I could pick up the phone and call. But because of what our church is doing with a local Muslim community, I have formed multiple friendships with members of that community. And I now have multiple people that I could pick up the phone and call and say, hey, you want to go get tea or coffee this afternoon and talk? And they would go and they would be with me. That's because we formed relationships with them. 2.5 years ago, it was hard for me, and I felt uncomfortable walking up to a woman in a hijab or walking up to a family who clearly was expressing a different understanding of God than what I understand. Now I no longer have that hesitation. I no longer have that fear because I've come to know that they're way more like us than they are different. And they're in my circle. And I love them and I care for them, and I can do that because that's what Christ calls us to do. One of the things that I love about our church, I love this about our church, is in this church, we have people on the spectrum when it comes to every single issue you can imagine. We've got people on this far end and people on this far end. We have people who could not disagree more with one another than what goes on in our church. But as a church, we hold fiercely to the middle. Fiercely to the middle. So fiercely that people on both sides get frustrated with us because we're so fiercely here. We're not going over here or going over here. We're saying, no, this is where we stand because this is where we believe that the gospel of Jesus Christ is to be found. Not on one side or the other, but when all of God's people come together as one. And we hold to that. In this church, you do not have to go very far to find someone who's very different from you. Economically, educationally, orientation, political party, sports team. You do not have to go far before you can find someone who's pretty much going to be on the opposite end of the spectrum on just about anything that you can imagine being. You know what our church reflects? The world. But you know where we're different? This table. Because around this table, every single person in this group, regardless of where they are on any issue, is welcome equally with love and openness. And we come around this table and we learn to treat each other with respect just the way Jesus would treat us. We're doing something right here. We're going to hold to it because I believe the world needs it. But there's some things we could do better, and we're going to start to practice that. There's 2 things coming up that I want to invite you to practice. To come around the table, both literally and in just conversation, to take next steps in getting to know people and moving beyond your own circle. The first is this. In September and October, we're going to have 5 potluck meals in 5 different church member homes. You get to pick which one you want to go to. You just get to show up. You get to have a good time. It's all about fellowship and faith and getting to know each other's names and each other's stories. We're looking for a couple more hosts. If you would be interested in hosting one of those potlucks, please talk to Julie, and she'll get you signed up and in the right place. The second thing that we're going to do beginning in 2 weeks is we're going to start a small group experience called Starting Point. We've done this before. I love Starting Point because it's a conversation about faith that's inviting for people who are brand new to Christianity or have been Christians their whole lives. We're going to come together and we're going to talk about things that are really important. There's going to be two ways you can do that. One is going to be in person on Sunday nights and Thursday nights. You don't have to come to those are two separate events. They'll do the same curriculum each week. You can come either on Sunday or Thursday. You don't have to attend all 8 weeks of that. You can come when you can. If coming and being around a group of people is something that's not comfortable for you, we're going to have an online community that's going to do an online study, and you can participate there, or you can do both. There's going to be more coming down the pike. But what I want to invite you to do is take advantage of this circle. Get to know the people here. Practice what Jesus would have you do outside of these doors. I know it's hard. But if Jesus was willing to eat and drink with the very people who were trying to kill him, it ain't going to kill us to eat and drink with people who are outside of our circle. Right? And in so doing, we might just find once again that Jesus' way is definitely better than our own. Amen.